It's the 15th day already, my goodness. I'm Dana Durnford. I hope you're doing well. Unless you're that bizarre nuclear industry bunch, a bunch of aliens, hates all species. That's the one thing I can't comprehend is why do they hate all the species so much? Because radiation attack the children of all species, not just humans, and they're well aware of it. Then it means they don't even like their own children or grandchildren or anything else, right? Why would you proliferate something that is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells? Well, what's the point? You can't escape it either. It's a dead end, right? It comes back and backfires. So what's the big picture? It's a question I can't answer because I don't think there is an answer, and the industry doesn't even have an answer. I think it's just evilness itself, right? That total disregard. Fukushima is not like eating banana, walking in the sunshine, getting on an airplane, climbing mountains, and being in the canoes. That's lies from 80 years of saying the same lies. That's what makes those lies so interesting, is that if you go back and look at the 40s and 50s films on nuclear, you'll come across this narrative, and if you follow the narrative throughout the decades, you'll see the exact same narrative. Because you can't tell the truth, see, after so many decades. And so you got to keep the same lie alive. Now, they come up with different variations of it, but it's just a lie. So this is the anniversary, the 12th anniversary of Reactor 4 blowing up. Now, there's two official pictures. These are both the official pictures. One of them's not real, but both of them are the official pictures, but one of them's not the actual building. They refuse to acknowledge it looks like this. Worldwide, the universities and media want you to accept the picture to your left. The fuel pool, which is what you were looking at, is actually at the top of the building. So this is the 12th anniversary. They refuse to acknowledge the fuel pools or the top of the building is gone. And they show you that picture over there and claim they're getting all the fuel out of the pool. Now, if you go back through the history of nuclear, there's something unique about how sadistic the industry and the military actually were, where they put dirty bombs in their munitions for tanks and rifles, but also what was unique was the A-10 Warthog, the coveted ultimate tank killer, buster / indestructible. And they brag about it in all kinds of Discovery channels, how it can fly back with half wings, and it's just the pilot can't be hurt and everything else. But all it does is it sprays dirty bombs. It's in 1989 when they went to Kuwait and the so-called Highway of Death, where they killed 300,000 bath parties driving Rolls Royces full of loot, paintings and jewelry, shops they robbed and everything else. And they came in with the A-10 Warthog and sprayed 700 tons. Now, they shoot 1.5 tons a minute, but this was a slaughter on the highway, so it didn't last too long. There was other military, obviously. What was interesting about that was they didn't arm the soldiers on the ground until the day of battle, so-called battle, genocide. Because in Vietnam, they learned their lesson was the soldiers were sick of getting chemtrailed for 9 years by Agent Orange and committing atrocities against little villages that were obviously innocent. that they rebelled, and they killed around 10,000 officers. They killed them in the mess tents, they killed them in their sleeping quarters by throwing in phosphorus grenades and hand grenades and landmines in front of their door. And they killed 10,000. That's why the Vietnam War actually ended. Didn't end because of frustration or something like that. It ended because of the soldiers killing the officers. The A-10 Warthog only shoots dirty bombs. So when you see stuff like Atoms for Humanity from UN and Atomic Energy Agency, the rest of them, it's the opposite of something for humanity. And they know. They're not naive. They're not gullible. They're not complacent. They actually know what's up. What's up is they also faked Reactor 3, not just Reactor 4. I'm not going to really cover Reactor 3. It's the Reactor 4's birthday. Well, there's no Reactor 4 anymore. But just to give you context, Reactor 3, there is no fuel pools, no reactor cores. The fuel pools have decades of reactor cores. You should be worried. You're supposed to know this stuff. It's very difficult to learn it, unfortunately. And unless you find me, you're probably never going to learn a single thing about it. The depictions over there of radioactive fallout. The bottom on April the 7th is 27 days after the tsunami. So what it shows is the entire planet covered in radioactive fallout. And that breaks the food chain. Then it starts manifesting. You see less birds, and you get less fish, and the fish are not jumping in your pond, and spiders are on your house, for instance. That's radioactive fallout because you can't tie on to trees or bushes anymore, and there's no insect-eating birds to eat them. That's why they're on the side of your house. That's the ultimate wake-up call. And we're so fortunate that we've been able to survive this long. It's time to start using our brains. Criminal charges for promoters of nuclear power. I like it. I should have started off with that one every single show. Every show, just start off with that one. Bah. Bah. It's a little slower. I mean, I can probably speed this up. Let me see if I can speed that up. I got to do that one more time. There you go. That's a bit quicker. I can cheat and just go like that. And this. Is Fukushima's endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? Yes. And you can see the radioactive fallout after just 26 days. That's a continuous plume covering the entire planet. Think of it as a snowstorm covering the whole planet after 26 days, and the snow never melts and it never stops snowing. You'd probably get it then, wouldn't you? But it doesn't do that. It does the opposite of that. It kills the bacteria, the fungus in your forest worldwide, and your forest stops decomposing and retaining water. And so your forest now soaks up heat because it has no way to cool itself, which dries the forest out, but you also have no bacteria, fungus to break down the litter and the foliage. And so when you have lightning strikes or careless campers, you have catastrophic fires because the forests are tinder. They don't have an ecosystem to maintain moisture. And we've never seen fires like that before. The ecosystem is not designed to have no ecosystem. So criminal charges of promoters of nuclear power, that'll come true at some point in the near future, for sure. High levels of radioactivity found extensively Japan says the area 150 kilometers from the nuclear power plant is radioactive, as the area is right by the nuclear meltdown. Again, you're talking about saturation. So that's a non-habitable zone, aka Earth, thanks to the 80 years of this. Air samples in Tokyo, 270 times more contaminated with anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout, were only acknowledged in cesium. Then global weapons fallout peak was catastrophic. So then we go back to Japan's event. Now nuclear meltdowns are infinitely worse than nuclear bomb testing. It plays out over a long time. You're talking about infinitely more inventory than was used in a bomb. But it cannibalizes steel and cement and rebar and water. And what I mean by that is it atomizes it, aerosols it at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures and ionizes and radiates it and releases it into a perpetual plumes. By the way, that's the Reactor 3. The behind me is one of the reactors. It's a 190 feet tall, 19-story building where my finger is pointed. The tall, skinny stacks like that one there is where they vent the fuel pools and the incinerators. All nuclear plants have incinerators where they incinerate radiation into your community. The industry completely out of control. There never was a single checks and balance. International Atomic Energy is the worst offender, period. In Reactor 3, you can actually, in the videos, which there is clean videos, but they're not released for some reason. But even in the grainy videos, you can see the fuel pools, reactor cores falling back down to the earth. So 270 times more contaminated than global weapons fallout peak, airborne. It was also 4,000 becquerels in the fog, for instance. There was 29 million becquerels per kilogram. You got to multiply it by 64 to get a square meter. All of these are just, oh my goodness, this can't be happening. And so a nuclear meltdown was worse than. So all the helicopter pilots in Chernobyl, 600 of them died.
The day after the March 11th quake, self-defense forces sprayed water on the nuclear power reactor in Fukushima. The images were broadcast throughout the world.
Let me see if I can find that clip.
So
they stopped trying to drop water, but the media's out there claiming that they dropped water and salvaged it.
Working to cool the plant. It's the first time details of the operation are being released to the public. J Village is the base for workers trying to restore the power plant.
One more I need in that equation.
On May 3rd, during the holidays, the self-defense forces that engaged in the water spraying operation completed their mission in Fukushima and withdrew. Good evening, this is NHK's Newswatch 9 for Friday, May 20th.
I smurfed it
The
up
seventh
today.
day after the March 11th.
It was heroism.
Особенно что-то такое.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out.
So all 600 pilots died. That was according to Harvard University, by the way. Okay, so this is the anniversary of Medusa. That's actually a death sentence. It caught fire and blew up and caught fire and, blew up. So just to remind you, the fuel pools were at the top of the building, so was the reactor core. As you can see to the building to your left, all the guts are hanging out of the building. Now that was the reactor core. Behind it was the top part of the bottom part of the reactor core. The yellow one is the lid. And so they're supposed to be at the top of the building, 100 feet above where they're to. But because of the way that it blew up, this is a 190-foot building. Now, the beams that I'm pointing at right there, the brace, you can actually turn an SUV around on top of that. If you were parked on it, you can turn it. That's how big that it is. It's really difficult to give you context. The pump truck was brought in, which was for pumping cement, not water, by the way. Totally different applications. Now, the pump truck was designed to manipulate you. That was part of the cover story. They flew that in. There was no nuclear engineer, enormous amount of plutonium and number of force. Each pool had around, it was 2% plutonium. Could be 3,600 assemblies. Each assembly is 1,800 pounds. And then 2% of that would have been plutonium. Except for the Reactor 3, which was the mixed oxide fuel facility, it would have been way higher, maybe 6% or more. Number 4, spent fuel pool is in danger of catching fire. I say that's a pretty accurate description. It caught something, that's for sure. Did Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4 catch on fire today? These are headlines and pictures that conveniently nobody shows you. Unless you come here, you have no opportunity to see it. Fukushima number 4 collapses. Japan will be evacuated. Japan. Not Fukushima, not Okuma or Nami or Futaba or anywhere else next alongside of the communities, but Japan. Japan. It's 160 million people. So they should have evacuated because number 4 collapsed. Now, officially that's never happened. The story is that a whole bunch of people went in and they were immune to radiation and fixed everything. And that the building doesn't look like that. Unit 4 had major impulse sound. Well, these panels are meant to release and cause the hydrogen that they talk about is the meltdown. So it melted through. That's what caused the zirconium cladding melting, caused the hydrogen buildup that displaces the oxygen. And then water or oxygen or water can cause it to detonate. But it's already melted down. And what they do for fracking is they'll add a few grams of uranium to the explosives, which will increase the fracking explosives by 8 times. So imagine fuel melting down and atomizing and then detonating. So it's not hydrogen that detonated, and hydrogen is a wicked detonation, so don't get me wrong. But that one, and Reactor 3, Reactor 2, and Reactor 1 were uranium atomized with the hydrogen, and then the detonation, just a spark or something would do it. But enormous amount of plutonium. And when you understand anything about this equation, you realize there's nothing survived it. There's no way a pool could survive it. The fire may have already occurred because it'll burn on its own when it's exposed to oxygen, just the fuel rods themselves. And the fuel pools were actually cracked open with the earthquake. And we're expecting another earthquake currently because every year on the anniversary, they have a $5 billion damage earthquake. And around the 16th last year was when it happened. Explosion possibly due to rods not being covered with water. Now, when that happened, due to the rods, well, if they're not covered by water, she's going to blow up and melt down. That's going to be a nuclear meltdown that caused the detonation. Now, when you see all the debris, that's going to still be on the ground 12 years later. They limbed that out with remote control cranes, built the cover off site, brought it in, laid it over it, and then faked it. And this is what it looks like.
Now, reports suggest that the reactors at the Fukushima plant were damaged by the initial earthquake and not the tsunami wave.
Yeah, so the earthquake damaged it. There was fire coming out of Reactor 1 right away. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, November 2013, and March 14th. This is the day it exploded. The 12th anniversary is the day, the 15th, when it exploded. And so this was a catastrophe. So they were faking it in the 13th, February the 20th. And so there was nobody that questioned that. There was one radio show, but it was alternative, that questioned this narrative. I'll play that clip for you, actually. Because that's appropriate. And I forgot today was the anniversary, because we're going to do part 2 of last night's show. Not that you need to see either part. Here's Helen Caldercott, who's done hundreds of interviews and claimed that they got the fuel out of the pool in Reactor 4. Now, she's wrote 14 anti-nuclear books and leads a bunch of organizations. Beyond Nuclear is one of them.
Building 4 is also similarly fragile, and it's got a huge cooling pool on top with all its fuel rods. But
now, so when you look at this picture here, it's clear there's no fuel pool in the top because there's no top, right?
they have been removing them.
But you can't remove them when they don't exist. And she's done this so many times, I got sick of the lie.
And it's been a very delicate procedure, and they've removed almost all. So if that collapsed now, I think it would probably be okay.
Okay, so you heard that. So later she was interviewed again, and she was asked, does it really look like that, or does it look like this? And I put those pictures in, the original pictures in the top. And we'll get to it. Bear with me.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
Well, that settles that. I mean, she's Helen Caldercott. She can't possibly be wrong. So the question is, does it look like this or does it look like that one over there? It can't be both of them. Nuclear fuel rods in the number 4 spent fuel pool are confirmed to be damaged, aka confirmed to not be there. The cover story was immediate. So this is behind, this is a rear shot here at this particular angle. That's Reactor 4. This is the pump house in front of it. So they stripped all of this off with remote control cranes. Then they built this off site, brought it in and laid it there with cranes, and pretended that inside of that, when they put the cover on it, the panels on it, you can see all the debris there. That's obviously a believable amount of radiation. They didn't clean up anything. They built this infrastructure. Now they're laying panels on it. And they're panels. That's one whole panel. It's put there by gravity. And then the official story
Now,
looks like
the
that.
division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Now, if he built the racks for the assemblies for the fuel pools, then he knows that the fuel pool is not there. But the idea of building this structure and putting these panels on it was to pretend that it looked like that. And Varney Gunnarsson, who done it for 70 of that particular type of reactors, if he doesn't know the difference, then he should be locked in an institution so he can be taken care of, right? Top nuclear scientist, Fukushima's most terrifying situation I can imagine. And that I've seen a paper which says is bye-bye Japan, and to evacuate North America's west coast if Unit 4 goes and the fuel pools are so that's why I have a poll asking, is Fukushima's radioactive endless fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? Besides, like, I have a lot of documentation about this. Okay, so let's play this clip of David Suzuki asking
3 out of the 4
question.
plants were destroyed in the earthquake and in the tsunami. The 4th one has been so badly damaged that the fear is if there's another earthquake of a 7 or above, that building will go, and then all hell breaks loose. I have seen a paper which says that if, in fact, the 4th plant goes under an earthquake and those rods are exposed, it's bye-bye Japan, and everybody on the west coast of North America should evacuate. Now, if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what. Fukushima is the most terrifying situation I can imagine.
Fukushima is the most terrifying situation I can imagine. You should evacuate the coast of the northern hemisphere. So the poll is asking a simple question. Is Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, endless radioactive fallout, a catastrophic event to all species worldwide? So I've done research expeditions from Vancouver to British Columbia year after year. And what I discovered was the species were exterminated. Not almost, but exterminated. And the species to the right are missing. Now, we went back 6 years to see if it recovered. And if you don't think that's amazing to the left, then you're missing a few chromosomes. And to the right, I went there year after year and scoured the beaches and the coastline. Year after year, 4 to 5 months at a time without coming home. Busted up and broken and feared and scorned and assaulted and arrested and attacked and demonized and vilified year after year. Obviously, I'm a terrible person because the radioactive fallout in the bottom right-hand corner is 19.5 days, not years, not months, not weeks, but days. It covered the entire planet in 19.5 days. And so I've drawn up some unflattering caricatures of the nuclear industry, the International Atomic Energy Agency, not because I'm a bastard, maybe a little bit, but because these people, I need to not mince words, so to speak. I need to be very clear. Now, he says nobody died at Fukushima, of course, because of Fukushima. And he was laughed at Constipated Party 26 2 years ago in Glasgow. So David
3 out of the 4.
David Suzuki said if reactor 4 goes, which is that one over there, then you should evacuate the northern hemisphere. That's an absurd statement, but it's an accurate statement. He come out and apologized later, but all he had to do was show that picture, see? He apologized. He came out later and apologized, said actually it's not as bad, but it's gone, right? The nuclear industry put the pressure on him. These are just 4 of hundreds of media that have pretended that they're at the reactor fuel pools. The Japanese ambassador to the United States, Murata, writes to the UN Secretary General that it's no exaggeration to say that the fate of Japan, the whole world, depends on the number 4 reactors. So that's the number 4. It actually doesn't even exist. So when you're talking about the fate of the world depends on number 4 reactor being resolved, you got all the world's media pretending that it's resolved. You got David Suzuki saying you should evacuate the coastline in the northern hemisphere, but it's actually confirmed gone, not almost, but gone. Helen Kellercott and Arnie Gunnarsson and the rest of them. He built the racks for the assemblies for the fuel pools. So the structure that they built there doesn't physically touch reactor 4. Doesn't physically touch reactor 4. And I'm going to give you some big zooms because you'll never see this anywhere else. You can see it physically doesn't touch it. There's no beautiful fuel pool above it because it doesn't actually exist. Nothing touches each other. Everything's actually empty. You can't build a fuel pool and say that it's the original fuel pool, but you can't build it because you're on nuclear meltdowns. You built it by laying these panels. You assembled everything off, built it off site, and assembled it on site with cranes to cover up the 30 or 40 feet left of the building. You didn't clean up the debris because you can't. It can't be that, because that was at the very top of that building, and the top of the building where those red depictions are doesn't exist anymore. I'm not the bad guy for being honest. I'm not a bad person for trying to do the right thing. I'm not doing this because of all the fun that I have. The joy, maybe, but not all the fun anyway. Doomsday-like radiation release. Doomsday-like radiation released if reactor 4 goes. So it would be a global catastrophe if the building looks like that to the left. Because it doesn't look like that. And what they're talking about is radioactive fallout. This is a plutonium-239 dispersion. And plutonium killed all the dogs in all the studies, by the way. It doesn't look like that on top of this, because this is the bottom of a building. That is the bottom part of that building. That's all that's left. So building the structure there doesn't turn it into that. because it actually no longer exists, so it can't be something like that. Despite the fact that's what they're claiming, right? They're claiming inside of that it looks like this, but because that doesn't exist anymore because you tore it off to your right and then faked that it looked like that to the left. Now, that's an incredible thing to do. That's a pretty risky thing to do, to fake a building. So when you look inside of that, do you see the fuel pool to your left? When they stripped it down, that's what's left of this. Now, here's something you'll never see, probably ever, anywhere else on the entire planet, is all four sides of Reactor 4 in a single picture. You'll never see that. I'm going to play the audio of four of many journalists claiming that they're inside the building that looks like this.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Okay, so obviously they're not in that reactor, right? Because it blew up and caught fire. Is Fukushima's endless radioactive fallout, perpetual reactor fallout, causing a worldwide extinction level event? Maybe. Well, like I said, we've done the research expeditions. And Fukushima is an extinction event for sure. So they're not in the building's fuel pool to the left because it doesn't exist anymore. And this is the 12th anniversary of that building. And for 12 years, they've pretended that it looks like that. 150 feet above the stump. Now, how big were these reactors compared to Chernobyl?
Fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and
so each reactor was 100 times Chernobyl, but that's not counting the fuel pools that were at the top of the buildings that no longer exist. They're part of that equation too, right? So they took the stumps of reactor 3 and 4, put covers on it, but didn't remove the debris alongside of it. And then pretended that, you know, the extreme of pretending where they're actually pretending they're on top of a building that don't exist. And if that doesn't concern you, you're in denial, serious denial. At some point you're going to have to come to terms. You're going to have to accept what I'm showing you is as fact at some point, and that anybody tells you different has to be treated as if they know the difference, right? So anybody that's perpetuating the lie, claim that it looks like this or that the tanks, everything is in the tanks, is perpetuating a lie. It's like claiming that eating the food. So this map here is the 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for over a decade. The Fukushima prefecture is in the middle. That's just one of the prefectures. So to claim that Fukushima food has any possibility of being safe is a ludicrous assertion. or even half of Japan, claiming half of Japan is safe, is the equivalent of saying that that's the fuel pool on top of that reactor, that it's up there but it's invisible. Now, if you had a fuel pool fire at a reactor, you would have to evacuate 24 million people. And so, if South Korea's one of their fuel pools caught fire, you'd have to evacuate 24 million people. And that includes people in China, people in Japan, millions of people in China, millions in Japan would have to evacuate. If a fuel pool, you can go read that article, if a fuel pool in South Korea caught fire, well, what about 4 reactor buildings that were 4 decades old with 2 fuel pools at the top of each building caught fire and lost the inventory? Because that's what the evidence, unfortunately, horrifically, not suggests, but unassailably shows. It's unassailable. And that the structure, they built that, and you got to appreciate how big that is. It's hard to wrap your mind around it. Maybe this will help you. So it's, when you look at it, it doesn't seem imposing. But when you look at it this way, hopefully, then you can appreciate how big that law is. Now, that infrastructure, again, when you put it around the plant, it looks like that. So it doesn't seem like this is very big. But that's why I'm showing you that, to give you context of size, right? And that's a lethal dose anywhere around that. Which is why you see steel plates on the ground. There is no fuel pool. That cement pump was brought in to manipulate you. But a reactor needs 4,500 tons of water a minute. A minute. 1 million gallons a minute. Before they get out of control. So see all that debris down there, a kilogram of that, anybody who walked past it would die. If you put it at a subway, everybody who walked past it for 1 million years would die. It's that radioactive hot. It's gamma shines and X-rays, neutron bursts, and beta rays. The structure is simply just a structure. The panels are simply just panels. The lie is horrific. The tanks are built at the one time to manipulate you also. The plume covered the whole planet right away. It wasn't just in the ocean, it covered it airborne, and it covered it right away, and it never stopped coming out. So when you see physics.org to your left, I put the picture to your right to show you what it actually looks like. See, when you got physics.org trying to convince you they're in the fuel pool of the building to the right, and you don't question that, and you can't walk there without getting a deadly dose. A short dose like that will kill you within the next couple of weeks. You're talking about multiple meltdowns all around you on top of that. You're talking about the stacks that are close to the building are lethal doses. You can't get close to them. So how are you supposed to get close to the reactors? In a paper suit, no less. Yale professor, nothing like this has ever been attempted. All of humanity will be threatened. All of humanity? Well, what about the other 8 million species? When do we put them into the equation? So let's put them into the equation. All of humanity will be threatened for thousands of years. If the fuel rods touch each other, it'll look like this. But over there is the official picture in 2013 claiming they're in the fuel pool of a building that don't exist. And so if all of humanity will be threatened for 1,000 years, and we're only at year 12, then you have to consider what I'm saying in the poll, what I'm asking. is appropriate. Is the Fukushima endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide, not just a part of the world, but a worldwide extinction level event? And the proper answer would be yeah. And you can deny it. That's good for you. I admire you. That's pretty amazing. Wish I could do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. We got James Lucid, who you're probably familiar with from the comment section, calling in to give my vocal cords a break. Hopefully, are you, James? Hi, James. Welcome, my friend.
I'm sorry, I just realized I wasn't sure if you were taking calls tonight, so I apologize
Yeah,
for calling in.
no, perfect.
I just wanted to let you know some things that I kind of stumbled on with AI of all things, of course.
Awesome.
And I've been experimenting with the GPT-4, which is the fourth generation, I guess you would call
Okay,
it.
sure, yeah.
And so, I have seen an improvement, and I've found some things I can kind of. It's all about the prompting. It's all about the questioning about what you give it. So this is all I said. I just want you to evaluate this. I want to give a couple of comments. There's 6 paragraphs in this speech that I told it to write, and this is the prompt I gave it. You are an anti-nuclear activist. Write a speech about the horrors of the ongoing Fukushima core meltdown. That's all I said. Now keep in mind that I could have said more, like, talk about the starfish, talk about the whales, talk about, I could get on it, just keep that in mind.
Okay.
I just want you to evaluate what it outputted just with that prompt alone. So let me. This is again just 6 paragraphs. It should be short. Let me just get through this. It starts with this: ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and fellow citizens, thank you for joining me today to address an issue that continues to loom over our heads like a dark cloud, threatening not just our present, but also our future. The ongoing Fukushima core meltdown have shaken the very foundation of our trust in the nuclear energy, and deemed our immediate and unwavering attention. The Fukushima disaster, which started on March 11, 2011, remains one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. Despite the passage of years, the nightmare continues to unfold, posing grave risks to public health, the environment, and the well-being of the global community. First and foremost, let us consider the human cost of this disaster. Tens of thousands of people were forced to abandon their homes, their livelihoods, and their community, turning into nuclear refugees overnight. Many of them continue to suffer from the physical and the psychological trauma of displacement, the fear of radiation exposure, and the uncertainty of ever returning home. We're halfway there. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the devastating environmental impact of the Fukushima meltdown. The release of the radioactive materials has contaminated the air, soil, and water, affecting local ecosystems and threatening the health and safety of both humans and wildlife. Marine life in the Pacific Ocean has been impacted by radioisotopes, raising concerns about long-term effects on our planet's delicate balance. Lastly, the cleanup and containment efforts of the Fukushima site have proven to be immensely challenging and resource intensive. The complexity of the situation, coupled with the lack of viable solutions, means that this crisis will persist for decades to come. In the meantime, the risk of additional radioactive releases remains ever present. As an anti-nuclear activist, I urge all of you to consider the grave consequences of our continued reliance on nuclear energy. The Fukushima disaster is a stark reminder that the potential risks far outweigh the benefits. There are cleaner, safer, and more sustainable alternatives, such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, which can help us transition away from our dependence on nuclear energy. It is our responsibility to hold our leaders accountable and demand transparency so that we are not left in the dark about the true state of the Fukushima disaster. We must advocate for investment in renewable energy sources and push for decommissioning of all existing nuclear power plants to prevent future catastrophes. Together, we can build a world where our children and future generations can live without the constant threat of nuclear disaster looming over their heads. Let us unite in our fight for a safer, cleaner, and more sustainable future for all. Thank you. Isn't that crazy?
That's yeah. That's kind of what I would expect too. You know, when I think about it, because I've never really thought about it, and because I know how advanced it is, I came across some video clips of it a few days ago where they're talking about the AI that was released a while back, and how actual intelligent it actually is. And you gave it a simple parameter without giving it details to work with, right? So it was reaching the internet looking for its consensus, right, for being an activist.
Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing, but it shows the truth is there. Like it's so transparent.
Well, it's better than any journalist we come across.
Oh yeah.
That's the sad part of reality. It actually headed in towards. It didn't try to blame the. It just told a story, right? Which is way better.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to share, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. That was really interesting. I'll have to listen. I'll have to listen to that again after, because that was great.
I'll keep at it. You know, I'll keep at it. Just trust me.
Yeah, because you're definitely getting there. Yeah, you're getting there. You're working it out, right? You're getting.
We'll get there.
Okay, my friend. Thank you. Good stuff.
All right,
I'm glad you called. Yeah, love you too, buddy. Thank you. That was amazing. We're talking about artificial intelligence wrote that, and now I've heard similar versions of that from what I call canned responses, right? And so it was using those types of sources. Obviously, you can hear connotations, but it was a very lucid story, wasn't it, for AI? It's frightening when you think about how lucid it actually was, right? So the average person coming into the conversation that was eloquent and was going to write an eloquent dissent would have definitely went along those perimeters. Yeah, it was fascinating. It's hard, if you didn't know it was artificial intelligence is the real key here, it was easy to believe somebody wrote it. And somebody that had a conscience. Unfortunately, that's the scary part. The AI actually sounded like it had a conscience. And that frightens me when I hear stuff like that, because that's not the norm. Okay, let's keep it rolling. Yeah, no, that was great, James. I'm glad you called in. That was fantastic. Because I would have never known that was AI unless you told me, right? So first off, these people pretending they're walking out of Reactor 4, this is a madness to even suggest that's not how nuclear works, right? Even the IAEA, well, actually, they probably done that. That's probably them pretending they're coming out of the building. So does that look like it's a 190-foot building behind them? The fuel pool is at the very top of the building. So you think that's a 190-foot building? And to see how far it's carved out behind their heads. And this is there's nothing there to shelter you from the gamma shines, the X-rays, the beta rays, the X-rays, and everything else. Neutron bursts. So there's no way you can survive in a paper suit. It's ludicrous to suggest that they're working inside of that. It's absurdness. You'll never see a picture of somebody hanging off the building. You're not going to see pictures of men working in that infrastructure. They don't exist because that's a lethal dose. And when you do see pictures of stuff like that, they probably would have died that day or that week. If that was true, if it's not Photoshop. We know they Photoshopped a ridiculous amount. So water could hurt, or a tornado could suck the water out of the fuel pool. Think about that statement. Tornado could suck the water out of the fuel pool that doesn't exist. High radiation prevented the helicopters from dumping water on the pools, but they're in there working right alongside of it. And when you see people walking, that's in a paper suit. That's not academics or scientists or journalists, or that's the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society if it's not Photoshopped. Researchers too frightened to get within 100 kilometers of the meltdown after seeing radiations. And so they brought in the world's biggest pump truck and set it up there to manipulate you, the same as they took these pictures here, which is most likely Photoshop, or they would have died that day in perfect suits, without work gloves, with just plastic gloves and their paper bag in their hand, plastic bags in their hands. Like, you can't survive a dose like that. Water cannons unable to spray the reactors. Turn away because the radiation is too high, but people are walking out of the building, Dana. The entire ground level of the northern hemisphere was buried in radioactive fallout, but ground zero is perfect, Dana, don't worry about it. High radiation withdrawal of the workers trying to restore power. Well, first off, there's nothing left to restore power to. The fuel pools are at the top.
The used fuel pools up near the top of the buildings have been depleted of water and overheating. That's been the focus.
They don't overheat. If they're depleted water, they blow up and catch fire and blow up. And there's the evidence. So is that 190 feet tall? Is the building behind that picture there, those alleged people in paper suits, 190 feet tall? Are they at the top of this building right here? Are these journalists, the members of the media, walking down the steps of a fuel handling machine after looking at the spent fuel pool inside the building housing, which is right here? Inside of that, the building house and reactor for fuel pool, which actually doesn't exist. So that can't exist inside of that beautiful. They can fix everything inside of it, but they didn't bother to clean up the outside of it. And there are people, for instance, who made the racks for the assemblies for the fuel pools, like Arnie Gunnarsson. And I put his picture, his video, up where the fuel pool would be. And he doesn't know that the fuel pool is not there.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Yeah, he should be in jail for the rest of his life. He's one of the most wickedest, cruelest people in human history to do what he's done. He should be brought there and strapped down until he fries. They couldn't clean that up, but it's perfect inside the pool, according to all the journalists. But they couldn't go outside because there's too much radiation. They can only go inside, Dana. The tanks were built to manipulate. I got a whole playlist on the tanks with all the evidence you could ever dream of. Find the pool, fuel pool, win $1 million. Win a Lamborghini. There is no pool. It's ludicrous to suggest there ever was. Well, Helen Caldicott will suggest it for you. When you look inside of this wreckage that's left over, how can you expect that to be a symmetrical, beautiful pool?
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
But they're not. There is no fuel pool. Right, to build a structure over this and then pretend that
we are here.
But they're not, right? So you'll never see these pictures anywhere, period, ever. This is the only spot you'll ever see these pictures. And that's just sad, right? And look at the roofs down there. It's not cleaned. When you zoom in on it, you can see all the debris, right? These are pictures you're never going to see anywhere. There was a single picture, very high quality, released in a Japanese newspaper with connections. And when I downloaded the picture, I was able to zoom in and extrapolate everything. But they're very careful on the quality. It's a very rare occasion. And now you can't download a picture off any Japanese major media websites since I came out with this information quite a few years back. So you can see the carnage, you can see the damage, but it's perfect inside. Do you get it? By the way, that's the elevator shaft right there, where they would lower a cast, that should be underwater, where they would lower a cast down to the ground floor of this 190-foot building, where there would be a transport truck would back up and the cast would weigh 50 tons, over 100,000 pounds, and they would just lower it down through the elevator shaft, which is right there. And so the elevator shaft and the fuel pools were the same. They're the same. They're all underwater at the same time, because that's how they transfer the fuel, right? But there's nothing left there. I'll get my big head out of the way. And so when I zoomed in and I started looking at these pictures, I was pretty upset with the nuclear industry. Because as you zoom in, how can you deny the reality? And the importance of the reality I showed you earlier. If Reactor 4 collapsed, you should evacuate the coastline in the northern hemisphere. And when I zoomed in on every facet of it, just to make sure, then we knew these people are simply dishonest. And when we've done the research expeditions, and we can't find the species year after year, excuse me, then that's why we have this poll. Is Fukushima endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? And so when I've done the research expeditions, these are before and after pictures of the coastline. These are authentic pictures. They're documentation. They all came with the GPS. I provide GPSs of all the research sites. And pre-nuclear meltdown, that's what it looked like. A few years later, it's exterminated. That's an extinction event. See? And was it worth sacrificing all of those species for carbon-free nuclear. Do you get the irony of what I'm talking about? So to call it carbon-free is craziness, right? And another facet of that story is you got a plume covering the whole planet from the ocean floor to hundreds of miles above the surface. You got an invisible plume, saturated plume covering the entire planet after 19.5 days. It never stopped coming out on top of that. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging plumes into the environment all day, every day. Because the fuel pools are all still split in the atoms, aka disease factories. And that's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, just shy of 186,000 miles per second every second. That's global warming. It's been going on for 80 years. And the wicked dumping that they done. So like they poisoned the planet so nuclear war wouldn't do it, basically their excuses. So Hanford, just one single incident, had during the Manhattan Project in the 50s, had dumped in pits 450 billion gallons. 450 billion gallons. And some people, they can't wrap their mind around it. But if you took a 6-foot wide aquarium and built it 518 feet tall and wrapped it around the entire planet, that's how much we're talking about of nuclear waste, high-level nuclear waste, where a liter will kill everybody who walks past it for 1,000,000 years. It was dumped into the soil. Most of that ran into the Columbia River, which ran into the Pacific. That's the Atlantic. This is the Pacific. 12 years on, Fukushima governor vows a return of all evacuees. So if the whole planet is covered in radiation, how bad is ground zero right there? But Uchibori, who's the current governor, and his legacy that goes all the way back, is an atrocious, horrific legacy. Bear with me here, we'll get it. There we go. 12 years on, Fukushima governor vows returns of all evacuees to a nuclear wasteland. So the first part of the show, we went down the rabbit hole of Reactor 4. Because it's the 12th anniversary of that building detonating. It's 12 years of them pretending it didn't. So this is super... So that first hour we just covered is super important. But also we're going to cover some news for a little bit. And that's going to start right now. We're picking up... this was the 12th anniversary news cycle. It's going to take a few shows to get through all of it, right? And this is the second show on it. 2 shows back I'd done... on Sunday's show was 2 hours and 45 minutes on species die-offs worldwide, which is one of the reasons we're invoking this poll tonight. Is Fukushima endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? And we know it is because we've done the research so many times, right? There we go. Let's get into the news cycle. Because there's nothing easy that we're going to do, unfortunately. And I'm embarrassed to say we're going to have snowfall down here because Dane and the Sanas and many, many other people obviously are suffering through California. What we're going to have, which is not very much, 15 or 20 centimeters maybe, it seems irrelevant, right? Even though it's a big deal for me. Just imagine being where Dana Nasana is and you had 48 feet of snowfall over a short period of time. You can't keep up with it. I was thinking about that today. Was how would I have kept up with something like that? Well, you would need to be out there every 2 hours because it's going to fill back in with blowing wind, right? And you would have to keep doing it until the storm stopped, but the storm didn't stop. It's gone on for a very long time. Because the jet stream done something unusual in history. The first time we've never seen a jet stream do a perfectly straight line. And California is one of those conveyor sections of the northern hemisphere. And California gathers up a lot of pollution. Normally, the pollution from the Trans-Pacific corridor, which blows pollution over from Asia, from east to west, it takes about 3 or 4 days for the pollution to cross the Pacific Ocean because of the jet stream, right? Adds to the pollution indexes for several months in California because it's got a tendency to linger over California. So when the snowstorm showed up, it lingered over California like it would with the pollution indexes. And so you had this perpetual radioactive fallout also going at the same time. It's very radioactive snow we're talking about. So Uchibori, which is the governor, is vowed that everybody should return to the nuclear wasteland of the Fukushima, which is this creature right there. And hanging's legal in Japan. I bet you a rope around his neck would work really good, wouldn't it? The central government plans to introduce in the difficult to return the nuclear wasteland itself new areas with relatively low levels to which evacuees can return and start living. You really got to be some weird demonic demon to even think stuff like that. That's the nuclear industry. That's the problem with the nuclear industry. Fukushima Governor Masao Uchibori has reiterated his commitment to enabling all nuclear disasters victims to return to the nuclear wasteland. In Fukushima, the so-called difficult to return zone, well, so is many places in Tokyo, where entry is heavily restricted due to high radiation levels. They actually open up areas without even trying to pick up 1-ton bags of soil. In addition, the government plans to introduce in the difficult to return zones new areas relatively low levels. But you can't have low levels in a nuclear wasteland. Toyota speeds up Fukushima plant decarbonization with hydrogen. Hydrogen is one of the most carbon-intensive, resource-intensive things to produce. Now, if you've done it with renewables, it would be brilliant because its emissions is just water, right? But the problem, what they're doing is they're going to use nuclear to make hydrogen and claim that the hydrogen is carbon-free by proxy. But nuclear needs 2 gas oil coal plants just to run. Its resources are stunning to keep it running. It can't run on its own power. These are huge city types facilities. They use an absurd amount of energy just to run the pumps. Tsunami sirens are causing 3/11 survivors to relive the trauma of 2/11. Do you really think that was an accident? So on the anniversary, at the time the tsunami hit, they're using the sirens, which traumatizes everybody that was manipulated into staying behind, right? Because, you're not. In order for you to stay behind, you were manipulated. You were incapable of understanding the danger that you're constantly exposed to. Let me keep going here. Each year, March 11, precisely 2:46 p.m., a siren blares across northeastern Japan. So a lot of people would run for the mountains when they hear the siren. You shouldn't bring children back to a nuclear wasteland. That's child abuse. But anyway, they don't want them to use the siren anymore. The government likes the siren, right? Because it makes them feel special. Because they have so little pleasure outside of exterminating us. Japan remains the second worst in international rankings for women in the workforce. It's actually worse than that. Japan is the second worst country to be if you're a woman. It's the third biggest industrial economy on the planet, but it's a scum, degenerate, bigot, racist, prejudiced, male-dominated. And they're not real men in Japan. They're some kind of weird creatures. South Korea was the worst one. Why am I not surprised? Anti-nuke protesters in South Korea. Girls are allowed to participate in that, but not much else. Which is surprising, really. It's already poisoned. They think that the tanks are coming, right? What the propaganda machine, prolific propaganda machine has done is manipulated them into thinking that it didn't happen. And that it will happen. So that's the idea of the fable of the tanks, is what might happen, what has already happened. And I'll show you what has already happened. Right, because you got everybody complacent thinking about tanks as if the tanks are the holy grail, right? But here's another model of the radioactive fallout. The ocean was covered right away. The tanks mean nothing. They were empty. You can't put it in the tanks. If you fill the tanks up with radiation, what happens, and that's after 16 days, by the way, if you fill the tanks up with 2.2 sieverts a liter, where they only acknowledge beta, that's 1.4 million sieverts per tank, which means you can't build another tank on site. You can't filter it because you can never change the filter. The filter is not some magic piece of equipment that is immune to radiation. It's the same with electronics, right? It destroys all electronics. So the filter becomes thousands of sieverts right away. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose walking past it. You'll die a week or two later. Imagine what a filter would be like, right? They weren't at the country's famed ski resorts. They picked Fukushima. We're missing something. Oh yeah, disaster destination. Fukushima snow brings back people that are complacent. So that was another story about how they're tricking people to go to the nuclear wasteland and claiming that it's revitalization, right? That's a misrepresentation. So people that love skiing doesn't necessarily know much about radiation, and they're trying to quantify that by saying that helps get rid of stigma. Now, we've seen all kinds of itinerations of that. Let me see if I can find a quick one for you. There you go. How about this one? Yeah, there's all kinds of things that they've done to try to so-called bring attention, right? So, no, Fukushima Health Concern says baseball, softball chief, they're going to have the Olympics in Fukushima, right? Claiming there's no adverse effects from the millions of one-ton bags on the food. They're looking to sports to rebuild the image. They're looking for sake to rebuild the image. They even had this creature from United Kingdom drinking his nectar. China proposes talks aimed at easing Fukushima, which is a complete fabrication, by the way. Would you play ball at Fukushima to show a bunch of kids in a nuclear wasteland? So MIT and Stanford, Oxford, and Yale are not trying to make robots for nuclear. Students are. That's a failed society, right? Impossible High World Health Organization, which shouldn't exist, Initial report estimated Tokyo and Osaka infants' thyroid doses at up to 1 full sievert in Nami, and 10 to 100,000 microsieverts in Osaka, 600 miles away. These are catastrophic numbers. Impossible high, but not really. And that's the most terrifying statement imaginable. TEPCO made the Fukushima plant into a machine for generating radioactive fallout. A machine. Gas station is a beacon of hope for the nuclear wasteland. So clinging to anything, right? So this is an interesting one. The high-priced Fukushima ice wall nears completion, but effectiveness was doubted. They alleged that they hired 260,000 people, over 250,000 people, to build the ice wall. But if you don't build the ice wall and you pay everybody $1,186, then that's what 260,000 people would have made if you don't build the ice wall. And why would you build an ice wall when you can build a real wall? What's the incentive? Right, so that's an incredible statement on its own. Fukushima is again aggressively promoting its attraction. Yeah, there's an agenda, and there's a lot of complacent people, and Australia happens to be full of them, including an industry expo in Sydney and Melbourne, Australia, which has a very strong pro-nuclear. They're the kind of some United Kingdom and Australia are the most vicious pro-nuclear communities I've come across. They're actually vicious as in lawyers, but they're vicious mass murdering lawyers. So people coming from resorts to go skiing in a nuclear wasteland by deceit and deception is not a revitalization. 10 years on, reconstruction tax continues to stir debate. Reconstruction tax, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. The tax was introduced in 2013, so people were taxed 2.1% until 2037. 2037. Another 14 years, so that's a total from 2013. Everybody gets an extra 2.1% tax, which generates about 400 billion yen in governmental revenues. Not governmental revenues, it's robbing taxpayers. It's robbing them. That's robbing them, right? Originally planned a higher tax rate for a shorter period of time. In 2011, the bill was amended during its duration while lowering the rate. As of March 2022, the funds utilized for the reconstruction budget reached 39 trillion yen. So there's no incentive for them not to be evil, right? They get all this free money, and the idea is to manipulate you till you stop looking, and then they can, then they won, and you lost the planet, which is 393 billion Canadian, which is equal to about $4 American. 39 trillion. That's a joke, by the way, in some ways, I suppose. During the last 10 years, critics have increasingly pointed out the misuse of the budget. Misuse. No, it was weaponized. One of the first things they done was made up a list of anti-nuclear activists and celebrities and musicians, and then isolated them by paying Google and Twitter to attack them or disconnect them from their followers. A professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and chairman of the study group aiding the panel argued that it was the heartfelt feeling of solidarity across the country that prompted the decision. The people wanted to increase their taxes as the goodness of their hearts, which is an absolute bizarre statement. That's simply not true. And looking back to the decision to introduce a levy was built up on a large consensus within the public. No, there was no consensus. There was no referendums. Politicians were afraid of a spike in taxes, but I think the Japanese people were willing to accept even a fairly large tax hike, even if it was for reconstruction. You can't reconstruct in a nuclear wasteland, so if that had been a referendum, it never would have passed. Well, they would have spent $1 billion in propaganda so they can get 100 billion or 1,000 billion back out of it. It was a pity the government extended the duration of the tax to 25 years. You can give the government all the money you want, all the money on the planet. You can't fix the radioactive fallout. You can't claw that back. On the anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, Australia must stand firm against nuclear. David Sweeney. David's pretending that the water is in the tanks. He's showing you an old antiquated picture when there's endless great pictures available. To release large volumes of radioactive contamination to the ocean and the air. Why don't you show us a model like that? How hard would that be to do? Right? Includes water used to cool nuclear fuel rods along with contaminated groundwater, rainwater, seepage water. And that there's 300 tons of water collected each day. And there's 1,000 tanks. 300 tons is equal to 2 garden hoses a day, running 24 hours a day. It's piddles. It's like pissing. You're talking about 9,000 degree Fahrenheit melted reactor cores in building 1 and 2 that are down deep into the earth in the China type syndrome. Claiming that the 1,000 tanks, which is the song and dance, has been going on for 12 years, but since 2013. Just bear with me, I'll show that to you because that's so important. So what Sweeney done was he gave you the propaganda's narrative that's been going on for over a decade. He gave you nothing new. Nothing. He gave you the 12-year lie and deceit. So he's not a very nice person. I thought he was a decent guy, but he never done any research. He showed you a shit picture on top of that. I'll show you the legacy of the tanks, because there was 1,000 tanks in 2013, and there's 1,000 tanks in 2023. How many tanks did they build in the last 10 years? Tanks at the crippled reactor, Mari Yamaguchi, by the way. 2013 September, they had 1,000 tanks. How many they got today, Dana? 1,000 tanks. 2014, they had Mari Yamaguchi, by the way. They had 900 tanks. In 2017, they had 900 tanks. 2019, they had 1,000 tanks. 2021, they had, you guessed it, 1,000 tanks. So you can fill up all those tanks with a single reactor 6 times a day under normal volume. No, the tanks is the manipulation. What they don't want you to consider is what happened. They want you to think about what might happen when it's already happened. And here's the models from France, for instance, from many different countries that are based on the release, some of the releases, not the entire releases. There's many other things you got to kind of worry about. They're growing food alongside of 1-ton bags and shipping it worldwide. So they got people compartmentalized so they don't understand very many facets to the story, right? And we got a poll, everybody got a poll, I got a poll, you got a poll, you got a poll, everybody got a poll. Is Fukushima endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? And we got 52 votes. We got 100%. Excellent. Bear with me here. I'm trying to... This should work, I suppose. Yeah. So the ELP system, TEPCO intends to treat the water prior to discharge, remove some contaminants with the ELP system. Now, this is David Sweeney, by the way. And I'll just talk about the REVA system, which was the original filtration system. They were going to build a fence, a bypass operation, a wall, blah, 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 blah. Let me explain to you anyway. It's really about the tanks. Because most people have no concept about actual documentation. Everything's based on the propaganda, right? So the REVA, first there was the series system, was supposed to separate cesium, was a filtration system. This is a ludicrous assertion because that's part of the cover story of cesium-137. So 2014 in August, TEPCO to abandon France's REVA's water filtration system. System has been unused and kept out of operation. The ELP system, 2014 April, has yet to function reliably and was kept out of operation, same as they were going to build a bypass operation, but that never had any effects. They're going to build a wall, a so-called fence, but that's not possible because you can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. So how are you supposed to filter something like that in your paper suits, I wonder? TEPCO's ice wall operation not meeting expectation because it's an ice wall. It has no bottom, for starters. And it's an ice wall. Why wouldn't you build a real wall? They've done everything possible to kill the planet. What's the worst thing we can do? And that's what they've done over and over and over. EU Energy Commissioner called it an apocalypse, which was appropriate. So Sweeney says, on the anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, Australia must stand firm against nuclear. And then he fed you the song and dance from the nuclear industry for the last 12 years from Fukushima. And he's capable of writing something, you know that, right? I've actually read some articles that I was kind of impressed where he missed a bunch of stuff, but he was still pretty good. But he just bombed on this one. He's got a total F. Never put no effort into it at all. He stole it from somebody. Somebody else wrote it and he put his name on it by the looks of it. 12 years on, Fukushima Town praises two British teachers that used to work in Futaba, I think, or Kuma. In Futaba, which is 2 kilometers to the north of the multiple ongoing reactors and 8 fuel pools that have melted down. So they make these headlines where these teachers should be ashamed that they're associated with that cover story, right? Only one couple going to return after evacuation orders. Didn't about tell you that in that last story. Food for thought. Well, the last thing you want to do is food from Futaba, I can guarantee you that. Only one couple returned. And they're probably the loneliest people on the planet. Only one couple. So, but they're encouraging people to return to a nuclear wasteland that's ongoing multiple meltdowns as we talk. Which I think is pretty... It's just too much, right? Most of the homes were demolished. Only 10 remain. And most of them will be demolished soon too. Initially thought 3 or 4 households would be stupid enough to come back. And they might, don't give up hope yet. TEPCO is pretty good at finding victims and creating victims. Like, why would you let people come back to a nuclear wasteland only to prop up an industry that has no right to exist? EDF decides to keep 2 British nuclear power plants running. Yeah, because everything else they got is breaking down, right? Half their fleet in France has been down since last spring. What a disaster. And so they're going to take these old decrepit facilities that are already brittle from neutron bombardment, gamma shines and x-rays and beta rays over 4 decades. They're going to leave them open for a little bit longer. The reason they're going to close them down is because these reactors are brittle. They call them generating zero carbon electricity. This started in 2015 with the French Paris Accord. France, which is dependent upon nuclear, and has enslaved Niger for 60 years, right? Caused a civil war so they can get their hands on cheap uranium. Every facet of nuclear is just weirdo, man. Why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? This is another important question people better start asking themselves. EDF says the new lifespan is less natural gas is needed in the regional economy, and it avoids emissions equivalent to 5 million cars. Well, did you know that the 15 biggest ships on the planet create more pollutions than all the cars on the planet? Just 15 of them. There's 90,000 of them on the planet at any given time. That's 4 trillion people. That's 4 trillion cars, right? The animosity equivalent. But hey, no, nuclear will stop the equivalent of 5 million cars. So yay, nuclear. It's a completely, like the narrative it's the same everywhere. It's a nonsense narrative. The minute you start to pick at it, the narrative falls apart. The propaganda is ridiculous. Fukushima Food Fair opens in Hong Kong. Japan donated billions of dollars to promote food from a nuclear wasteland in other people's countries. You're talking about madness. Why? Like, they're so crazy they're growing food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Like, I could never imagine that. It was only when I read it in the newspapers, and newspapers were defending it, that I said, well, we lost the planet, I guess. How the hell do we ever get to this stage, right? It's like, if you're honest, that's what you're gonna extrapolate from it. But the city's government has suspended imports of vegetables, fruit, and other products from Fukushima since 2011. Well, 55 countries banned the food in 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima Prefecture. But you definitely want to ban it from Fukushima. You don't want to get, like, a bowl of that stuff can give you leukemia. There's 1,800 diseases and illnesses, and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. Illnesses. There's heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome is a fraction of the diseases that can manifest before cancer is manifested or diagnosed. All these years of being attacked and demonized and vilified, all it does is toughen me up. It doesn't change me. It's not going to stop me. It just toughens me up, makes me immune to it. I'm not here because don't like Japanese or don't like nuclear. I'm here because I'm supposed to be here. I was built to do this. I was given a thick hide so I could do this job here, right? I was built specifically to educate the population, get them to try to protect themselves. And the species are 1,000 times more vulnerable than a child is, and a child is 100 times more vulnerable than an adult is. And so imagine how vulnerable the insects are. And if you don't worry about that, then you're making a mistake. and it's a fatal mistake. About 1,300 residents of Waki City in Fukushima Prefecture filed a lawsuit demanding Tokyo and the government, which are one and the same now because it was nationalized, compensate them for their psychological suffering. Yeah, the psychological suffering, everybody on the worldwide should sue Tokyo or Japan rather, because Japan is ultimately responsible. Compensate them for their psychological suffering. But there's a physical suffering that's undeniable because there's 1,800 diseases from inhaling anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. And everybody on the planet has been exposed to it. Canada removed all restrictions on the food from the nuclear wasteland in the first 93 days, while every other country banned it for over a decade. So Japan can only ship it to one place, Canada. And so like obesity rates doubled in Japan in the first year and in Canada. And obesity after a nuclear accident is considered radiation brain damage. The enzymes now will cause you through your thyroid gland, which becomes saturated and starts producing radioactive hormones. And then your pituitary gland starts storing that on top of that. And this radiation is inside your body, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, and you're eating more every day. So in children and species, it gets into their bones and mutates their stem cells right away. And so they become lethargic, and then you give them toothpaste with fluoride in it to incapacitate them. And it's downhill from there. The High Court ruling was in line with the Supreme Court decision that found the government, which is the government who owns the Supreme Court, by the way, was not liable for the nuclear accident, but the government was liable because who's paying the bill? So if you're paying the bill and you don't get a say, what kind of deal is that? 2,500 people still unaccounted for after the 2011 quake and tsunami. Well, there was 2,000 square miles of debris in the Pacific Ocean after. It was 470 miles, 680 kilometers of coastline, up to 10 kilometers inland that got ripped off the coast. There was no infrastructure anywhere, and it was like a great big wood chipper. Evacuation plans still missing around 6 nuclear power plants. So you got what they're talking about is they got 6 nuclear power plants in Japan that are going to reopen, but there's no way to evacuate the people if you have an accident. You're talking about millions of people. And if you have a snowstorm, there's 0 ways to evacuate people. So therefore, the plant should never be open. But the plant can't contain the emissions. The fuel pools, as a brand new plant, when you take the first cycle out of the reactor and put it into a pool, it's game over for everybody's health. But that's an interesting story because you got to have an evacuation plan. And quite a few plants that wanted to reopen didn't have a plan, and the provincial courts didn't let them, the prefecture courts didn't let them open the plant because they didn't have an evacuation. Well, you can't evacuate people from most of these plants because of where they're built. What's happening at the Fukushima plant 12 years after the meltdown? During the Associated Press, journalists saw 30 giant tanks for sampling and analyzing the water for safety checks. Again, of course, this is ludicrous to suggest that the water they're pouring over the reactor cores is going into tanks, which is absurd because you're talking several sieverts a liter, which means you can't walk over the hoses. It's a lethal dose. And you can't never get near it, build another tank there. You can't get on the site again once you fill up a tank, right? And that you can't get rid of the Bromson lung effect, where you got all the gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas floating around in the air, pulsing energy at 186,000 miles per second. Bromson lung is a German word for braking effect. And so they're pulsing energy at the speed of light. These emitters from the anthropogenic man-made radiation they don't pass by each other. They pulse energy like in every direction. And when they hit other emitters at the same speed, they change direction, almost at the speed of light. And so you got 186,000 miles per second, 186,000 miles per second hit each other and change in direction. That effect from that, like a spark, is called an X-ray. And so you're getting whole body X-rays. And you can imagine you got invisible plumes happening worldwide. And so that's what really exterminated all the forests and spiders and insects and stuff like that. 12 years after 3/11, dispute grows over. So imagine what ground zero is going to be like, see? 12 years after 3/11, dispute grows over Fukushima radioactive soil. Now that story is March 10th, 2023, this year. Yeah, okay. Because there was another story I got there from 2022. What they call an interim storage site is in Okuma and Futaba, which are joined on, two communities joined on south and north, respectively, of the nuclear meltdown, saying that they had 13 million one-ton bags. It was 1,000 trucks a day with 6 bags on each truck for 7 years or something that brought them there. They're cutting the bags open and growing food in it in an exclusion radioactive no-go zone for sale. But in 2045, they got to move the soil out of the prefecture. Every part of this equation screams, how did we ever get this stupid? Soil was collected during decontamination procedures in cities and towns and villages polluted. Well, pollution is forever. Radioactive contamination is forever. You can't just pick it up and put it in bags. You got to dig up the town, the sidewalks, the roads, all the poles, telephone poles. Everything has to go. All the fences, everything. All the malls and the schools and universities, you got to tear them down and put them in a repository isolated from the biosphere for thousands of years. Picking up 1-ton bags of soil is not decontaminating. And you're only talking about 3% of the land mass, not the forest, but just the land mass itself, where they wanted people to move back into or farm food to. That's where they picked up the bags. That's not decontamination. That's the opposite. They're putting them on conveyor belts. They're unpacking them, so they're just cutting them open, putting them on conveyor belts. Remove the plastic, leaves, twigs, and non-soil waste. Everything's going to be radioactive, though. Is then taken to dump zones where it's buried 15 meters deep pits. So when it rains, it washes it down into the water tables. And talking about radioactive cesium, when there's over 1,000 fission products that you got to worry about. Right then, for 80 years, they've been building this fable of cesium-137, which is a nasty isotope, right? It has some serious adverse side effects, but curium isotopes are the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods. And curium decays within days, usually, most of the isotopes, like 238, 239, 240, 241, 242, will decay in several days to plutonium. And plutonium was named after the devil. Finally, the soil is covered with non-contaminated soil and topped with lawn. Well, a lot of it's turned into farmland. And the levels of radiation, now instead of 8,000 becquerels a kilogram, which is actually way more than that, they're claiming it's 0.2 microsieverts per hour. Well, you can't equate, on the one hand, becquerels, atomic decays, physical atoms, and on the next paragraph, call it units, microsieverts or millisieverts or anything like that, because that's directly from energy. In order to get the microsievert, You're talking about a physical shine, like beta shine or gamma shines, stuff like that. So fuel rods. But the fuel rods, by the way, if you're close to the fuel rods, they're splitting atoms. So you're breathing physical atoms that will sequester in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Same thing with insects and birds and mammals and animals and fish and everything else. So they say the radiation level is harmless to humans, but higher than elsewhere in Japan. Again, you can't conflate, right, microsieverts and millisieverts with atomic decays with physical atoms. But that's what they got done. And they also want then equated with bananas and potato chips and walking in the sunshine, right? It's a complete hoodwinking of the facts. And then they quote Asby Brown from Safecast in Japan. And anybody knows me knows what I think of Asby Brown and Safecast. These are criminals that have poisoned tens of millions of people that should never exist. They're a foreign invasive entity that went into Japan and took over the radiation readings in the country, but with fake Geiger counters. Bear with me. And so this is the 12th anniversary of Fukushima, but it's also today, the 15th, is the 12th anniversary of Reactor 4 detonation. And so the first hour I covered exclusively Reactor 4. Just hang on one second. Waiting for the system to catch up. There we go, we're caught up. I guess we'll leave it at that for tonight. I'm going to close the poll down here. Close the poll down. One more shot at the poll tonight. I had a great poll at Nuclear for Dummies. Is Fukushima endless radioactive fallout causing a worldwide extinction level event? We got basically 100%. Why, yes, Dana, it is. Vote. And we greatly appreciate that tonight. James took care of me, sent me a PayPal. Wow, thank you, James. That's amazing, my friend. By the way, thank you for that poem there with artificial intelligence. That's a frightening poem that AI compiled, man. It's a frightening. You would never know it was AI, see? That's what scares the shit out of me anyway. Anybody that wants to donate, the links are in the very bottom of the description. It's definitely an appropriate time for people to donate. It's been a pretty tough winter, and we're struggling. Okay, well, I thought the show went really good tonight. We covered all the important stuff about Reactor 4. I mean, you can't cover everything, right? The most important thing is there is no fuel pool, there is no reactor cores. And that the radioactive fallout that I'm going to bring up, where's the americium one to? There it is. The americium decays in 2 days to plutonium, and so does the neptunium-239. And so does curium. So americium, neptunium, and curium isotopes will decay to plutonium. And they'll do it in a couple of days, but plutonium has a 24,000-year half-life. So 240,000-year lifespan. So long past the human experience, for sure. Yeah, I agree, James. Thank you again, by the way. It is investing in the future. That's what donating it is. And I've been around a long time, for those who are not familiar. And if I had real funding, I would have the nuclear industry already destroyed, for sure, right? Because the truth does that. It resonates with everybody, women, children, kids, sheep, and everything else, right? The truth resonates. It's undeniable. And so it's really, we spent all these years gathering up facts, and now it's unassailable, right? It's the documentation we provide. You can win. You can beat the nuclear industry in any conversation, because that's what the truth is, and they know it. They'll cower and wither and fall underneath your common sense. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. You have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow night. And because the anniversary, I pushed it pretty hard. And then we had the dolphin dying and beaching. Stranding. That was a stranding, not an ice event, right? Because the presentation I'd done, I went down and investigated. It was slush on the coastline. They could have got away. And there was no need for them to beach like they did when they had deep water at their fingertips, right? So there was a lot to it. Okay, good night, everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. See everybody tomorrow night, Thursday night, for the last show of the week. Because we start on Sundays, and we try to do 5 days a week, but we're still recovering. Take care, everybody. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and consider donating. The links are in the bottom of the description. Everything adds up in a hurry, so hurry. Good night, folks. Yeah, good night, everybody. Take care.